It's my great pleasure today to introduce David Groenfeldt, who is going to speak to us on an ethical response to the water crisis. One of the wonderful things about the Berman Institute is the range of topics that we take on, everything from bedside clinical ethics to science policy to public health. And probably no topic in public health has had a longer history at Johns Hopkins than water. We'll tell you about later. There's a long water history, interest and focus on water at this institution. And so it's especially wonderful to be able to bring to Johns Hopkins one of the leading thinkers on questions of ethics and water policy. David is the founder and director of the Water Culture Institute in Santa Fe, New Mexico. By background, David is an anthropologist and did field work way back when on irrigation in northwest India.
What is that?
Way back when some of us were young. He spent 5 years with the International Water Management Institute in Sri Lanka, working on local level irrigation governance in Asia, followed by 13 years in DC at the World Wildlife Fund, consulting firms, and then later with the World Bank on participatory irrigation management and watershed management. So you can see that David has spent a good chunk of his career in the field working on water issues as they affect people quite directly. He is focused in particular, though, on cultural aspects of agriculture and water policies in Asia and in the American Southwest. He served as the director of the Santa Fe Watershed Association from 2006 to 2010, before establishing the Water Culture Institute in 2010. He's currently working on something which absolutely fascinates me, which is a global water ethics charter. This is a global effort to develop a charter to guide water policy and practices from the standpoint of ethics. I don't know of any other enterprise quite like it, right? Actually pretty singular. So most recently, he is the author of a new book, a 2013 book called Water Ethics, A Values Approach to Solving the Water Crisis. Please join me in welcoming David.
Thanks very much. I'm going to try standing up here, and I'll just talk that way because I don't want to be behind. I've changed this title a little bit because I thought I wanted a little more active than that. So I'm really trying to show or suggest how ethics can change water policy and solve the water crisis. And I think it's very consistent with the approach that the agricultural ethics program is also trying to take. We don't want to just think great thoughts among ourselves. We want to make the proverbial difference. And this is the cover picture of my book, and I really like this picture, and I couldn't fit it all on, so I always like to show that picture. But it also represents to me yes, it's romantic, and I'm an anthropologist, and this was my study village way back when, but there are elements to this that I think are part of our future and not just the romantic past. I think we need to start thinking about a romantic future, and that's not really what I'm going to be talking about specifically, but that's kind of what drives me is an antidote to the doom and gloom environmental sustainability scenarios that we hear about so much. Can't we have an interesting, fun life and still be sustainable? I hope so. So I'll talk a little bit about what I mean by water ethics, discuss why we need water ethics, what's the problem that we're trying to address, and how ethics applies to that. That's number 3, and a little bit about what we can do. So I don't really have to tell you why bother with ethics, but water ethics sometimes requires a little explanation because it's often viewed, and can everybody hear all right in the back? It's often viewed as such a technical issue that it escapes notice as an ethical issue. And even among environmental groups, it's seen, or it tends to be seen as something that's doesn't really have an ethical dimension. It's more of a kind of a management, economic, legal dimension. And I think that it's so critically important to challenge that in a gentle way and say, well, it also has a very significant ethical dimension. And it's fortunately in water, there has been a history. I'm not the first one to write about water ethics, but it's not a very effective history. People don't really know. Within the water field, they're not familiar with the writings on water ethics by and large, just because it doesn't, there's just not much traction. And I don't know bioethics, but I just wanted to suggest how it links a little bit. And the basic way that I see it as linking is that water, in the water field, we say water is life. And so, in biology, you can kind of say the same thing. So where I feel that there's room for very fruitful discussion is looking at the relationship between people and biology, or between our relationship to nature. I think we're all looking at different parts of that relationship between the human organism and the natural environment. And the last 2 points, I think, are, from my little understanding of bioethics and public policy, there's also a concern about finding the best value for our public health investments. And that value isn't an economic value, it's a health value, a nutrition value. It's something larger than just dollars. So I call that soft economics. And that's also what I'm trying to do with ethics. I don't want to give up economics. It's kind of a good way of thinking about things. You just don't want to take it too seriously. So as far as I'm aware, the first good overview of ethics in water was done locally by the World Watch Institute when Sandra Pastel was a staff person at World Watch in 1990, and I guess it was before 93, but she published her book in 93, and there's a chapter on, I think it's called The Missing Piece, or We Need a Water Ethic, or something like that. And in my book, I kind of take issue with it. It's not a matter that we don't have ethics, we just have the wrong ethics. And I think it's important to try to figure out where we're starting from when we talk about ethics in water, particularly because it's not a well-worn path. And just to kind of look at the ethics that already exist. Because everybody who's doing all these bad things to the water system are doing it for, by and large, good reasons. That it's just a difference of view, but it's not so much a difference of opinion so much as a different perspective. So the engineers building the dams that cause so much environmental harm, they're not out there to cause environmental harm, they're out there to provide economic benefits. So I think we have to acknowledge those ethics first, and I think then we can find common ground. So it's, in a way, I see ethics as a good approach to mediation and negotiation. In fact, I'm hoping to meet in the next couple days up in Boston with the MIT program on water diplomacy, because water diplomacy is kind of a buzzword right now. It's the Dutch are funding a project on water diplomacy because they do mediation work between countries. But I think the concept of water diplomacy can also be used not just only between countries, but between groups, and look at, well, how can, even between engineers and economists and lawyers and environmentalists, that it's ways of how do we kind of find enough common ground that we can at least talk peaceably about our differences. So let me just say that these older books on water ethics don't really treat water ethics as a single subject. They're looking at pieces of it. And my book on the left is the first book to do this, which in fall of last year, followed very quickly by another book by Christina Peppard, who I don't know, but she's talking about Catholic views of water. So it's very much of a religious perspective, but it's looking broadly at the whole spectrum of water, as I also try to do. And I think we need more of that, that we need to look at the ethics of water as part of the water training that people get. So you don't just learn about hydrology, that you also learn about ethics. So the problems with water, what are we trying to, what's wrong with water? And in my view, there's nothing wrong with water. There's something wrong with our approach to water, with the way we conceptualize it. And so I have 4 kinds of problems, which are not, anybody can come up with these 4 problems of physical, environmental, social, and cultural. But the basic thing that people realize when they look at water is we're running out of it, it's not sustainable. So that's really important because that's driving people to ask questions about, well, what should we be doing? Then they get different answers. But at least it's a motivating factor. So the physical manifestation of the water crisis is, it's like, here's where bioethics I think can be really good. The patient is visibly sick, and you can recognize it, and everybody can agree. So there's no debate that our rivers are getting sicker. I mean, yes, there's some exceptions, and there are some. The Rhine River has salmon in it, which it didn't have 20 years ago. So it's not all a bad story, but by and large, at least where I'm living in New Mexico, the natural environment of the water ecosystem is not getting better. It's getting worse. And our goal is trying to make it get worse at a slower rate than it's getting, but not really to make things better. And then we have climate change, and that's going to make things more difficult. So that's the physical problem. Then there's another kind of problem, which is that the environmental problem, that the ecosystems are collapsing, and that's a problem for nature, whereas the other problem of we're running out of water, that's really a problem about us. It's an economic problem, it's a water scarcity, what we call water scarcity problem, but the environment collapsing is also something that we should be concerned about. And in the water profession, it's not so clear. That distinction between water as water, kind of disembodied water, we're running out of that, and then ecosystems being unhealthy, I think that connection is not all that visible. So you have to really try to think about it that way. And so if you take an environmental ethics perspective, that means you're concerned about the environment for its own sake. And then you're really worried that when rivers have no flow, when river channels are stopped up, the Rio Grande doesn't flow. It doesn't flow to the Delta on the Gulf of Mexico. It doesn't even flow to Texas now. It gets stopped. Part of the reason it gets stopped is there's no flow, but part of the reason is that the channel itself hasn't been cleaned out. It's like it's full of sediment because it doesn't have the high flows that clean out that sediment and make the river healthy. So it's like it's really helpful to think of the river as a living being that needs to get its exercise, and it's not getting exercise. It's more of a couch potato. So that's the environmental problem of water. And then there's the social problem. And the social problem has gotten a lot of publicity over the last 10 years because of the Sustainable Development Goals of the UN that said we're trying to, I think it's cut in half the number of people without access to safe water and sanitation. And so then you have Matt Damon and other celebrities going to Africa and investing in drilling wells and giving publicity and talking about the social inequities of lack of access to water. In 2010, the UN declared that it's a human right to have access to safe water and sanitation. So that's a huge, well, one small step for man. It's important. It doesn't solve anything by itself, but it raises a lot of publicity awareness, and it also provides a framework for lobbying governments for investing and water supply. But the social issue is not only that people don't have access to water, but it's certain groups of people, like poor people, or disenfranchised people, or ethnic minorities, that the people who don't have access are the ones who are being shafted in so many other ways. So it becomes this human rights issue. Now it's a human rights issue. And it's a huge issue. I feel we shouldn't let it cloud, disguise all the other issues that are there. But so sometimes I feel ambivalent about the social side, because there's no question people need water. But in the rush to provide the water, we often forget about the environment and the fact that, as an anthropologist, all those people that need water, they're obviously getting water now from somewhere. And let's at least look at where their water sources are and then evaluate a little bit, how can they be cleaned up, rather than quickly drilling a new well that might not be there 20, even 2 years from now because they're missing a bolt or something. So anyway, that's a very complicated social problem of getting water to people who need it. And then there's this kind of last and usually least issue of culture. And what do we mean by culture? And do we just mean cultural values and kind of diversity, or do we mean the rights of cultural groups to live their lives in the way they define? And that also became a UN human right in 2007 with the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, 2007. The US was the last country to sign it. And it's actually a pretty progressive document. I'm sort of surprised we did sign it, because it acknowledges the rights of cultural groups to their customary territories and things like that, which they don't actually get in practice. But there's a lot to be done in the water world, just applying the rights already accorded in various declarations, like the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, applying that to water. So that's the cultural problem, if you will. The problem being that in the name of water development, Indigenous people routinely get moved out. That's the resettlement issue from dams, but it's larger than just dam resettlement. So below those problems, I think, is a deeper concept that is problematic, which is the idea that water is limited, and that if I have more water, you have less water, that somehow we've applied the win-win to economics, but we haven't applied it to water. And this culture of poverty was labeled, the idea of the limited good concept was labeled by an anthropologist, George Foster, in 1965, in an article that's available on the web for free. And he used it to explain why peasants in Michoacan, Mexico, weren't kind of getting out of their poverty. They were so suspicious of each other, and they couldn't really imagine the whole community benefiting at once. It had to be like either it's a zero-sum game. And I think we have inadvertently applied that same kind of thinking in our cost-benefit analysis. That we do cost-benefit analysis to say, we used to do this to justify a dam. A dam, if it's going to inundate a reservoir. I'll give an example from Arizona. The Orem Dam, a dam that was never built. The reason it was never built, it was supposed to be on the Colorado River in western Arizona, so kind of north of Yuma somewhere. I'm not sure exactly where. And the dam was going to be built on land of an Indian tribe. And that Indian tribe had this terrible, tragic history of being evicted from their ancestral lands in the 19th century, moved to some fort somewhere. Many of them died, and then they were able to come back, and they were actually now, this is in around 1980, in the early 80s, late 70s, early 80s, they were living in their ancestral lands, speaking their ancestral language, And like, yes, we did it. And then the government says, by the way, we want your land, but no worries, we're going to pay you. How much? You know, what do you want? And they said, we're not selling because this is our whole being. This is it. This is our life. And this article, there was a PhD dissertation in sociology by Wendy Esplanade. And so it's available as a book. If you Google Orme, O-R-M-E, Orme Dam, Wendy, it will come up. But she distinguished between three groups, and it's her simplistic kind of way of pulling apart. The engineers, who for ethical reasons, I mean, she didn't use the word ethic, but basically the engineers said, this is the perfect place for a dam. It causes the least environmental harm, has the good gradient, it's a good place, it's safe, it's secure, and all that. You have to build a dam there. I mean, that's, I think, a very valid type of ethic that we also have to appreciate in the water world. Then you have the technocrats who said, okay, so we understand that they want their ancestral land, so it's going to be expensive to buy them out. How much? And what's culture worth? And they were willing to kind of keep negotiating up. They didn't mind. They weren't being cheap or miserly. They just, and then the Indian tribe, fortunately, when this is very unusual, the reason the dam was not built is that that tribe had good governance, or had unified governance, and was able to present a common front. And they finally convinced the technocrats that no matter how much they offered, it wasn't going to be built. And it wasn't. But those different ways of thinking, all from an ethical, you could check ethical, but they're responding to different kinds of values. So I think, but what we have taken up in our analysis that is the persistent concept that we have in water is still that cost-benefit analysis, that we expect there to be costs, that the river is going to be harmed, whatever we do to it, there's going to be a harm, and we accept that, and that's just part of the cost of doing business. And I think we need to get away from expecting the exploitation of nature as part of development. And because when we expect that, we're not fazed by, oh, it's an expensive project and it's going to, have all these environmental and social consequences, but that's just the way it is. Let's look for win-win situations that work, that win-win-win around these different ethical concepts. The reason that I'm standing here today is because, for various reasons, in 2006 I took a job in Santa Fe with the Santa Fe Watershed Association. And the reason I wanted this job, I'd never worked in my own country before, because I've always worked on international development. I mean, I worked in the country, but I hadn't worked on U.S. issues. And so they were looking for a director, and I wanted to introduce the concept of environmental flow, which is basically, the water concept is a living river is better than a dead river, that there's a basic amount of water that's different for each river, but that, yes, you can tap rivers, that's fine, but you can't tap them so much that they die. If you're a Maasai herder, you stick your straw into the cow's neck to suck out the blood, but you don't suck out all the blood. You suck out some of the blood because you want that cow to continue. And then you can argue, is the Maasai herder doing it out of sucking out only a little bit of blood because he cares about the cow, or only because he cares about his own future? And does it make a difference? So that's kind of, we won't go there. But in terms of the river, that dry river that you see there is normal for the Santa Fe River only because it's dammed up upstream. And it's dammed up for a reservoir for drinking water, which is reasonable enough. But the idea that you can just dam up a river and have nothing coming out again it's legal in the West. Western water law, all the states, Western water states, started out with this law, which is an adaptation of the 1872 mining law, that first in time, first in right. You stake your claim to the gold, you get it registered in the county courthouse, and you've got your claim. But you have to use that gold. You have to make use of it within a certain amount of time. The same concept has applied to water use in the West. You can steal water from nature, it's okay, but you have to use it. So that's led to use it or lose it concept in water law, which is incredibly unethical, but very, very, very legal. So anyway, the Santa Fe River, the policy of the city and the state was to divert, basically impound all the water for drinking water. That's a good thing, because that's a social, economic benefit, according to local ethics. So we challenged that approach, and we got the Santa Fe River named as America's most endangered river in 2007. It's an annual American Rivers does this most wanted, most endangered thing every year. And all we were doing to make our claim is saying, just appealing to the European water law, which has, in Europe, if New Mexico was still part of Spain, which long ago was, we would not be able to do this because the Europeans have a water law that says rivers have to be kept in good ecological status. And then there's a whole industry around determining what that means and are you complying and all that. But it's a, you know, we can handle that. But you have to have that concept before you can apply the science. So we got the river nominated. We had a press conference with TV, and we were the former, not me of course, but my predecessor, the former director, was interviewed on NPR. All things considered, it was like, yes, we got the publicity that we wanted, and thinking that would make a big difference. And it made some difference. It made it easier to get funding. It made people more aware that there was a river. But the people in Santa Fe really felt they were being misunderstood, that the outside world didn't understand the realities, of water in the West. And this led to a lot of consultations. We did a visioning exercise. But I just want to mention that we had one meeting where my board president, the chairman of our board for the Watershed Association, and myself, and two of the more friendly city council members had an informal discussion about the river, and they, why does the city have this? Why don't you try a little harder to open up the dam and allow some water to flow out, and try to at least have some bit of flow in the river and have some ecosystem there? And the city council person, turned to me and said, "David, you just don't understand. There's not enough water for us and for the river." And that just really, that still echoes in my mind. It's like the Big Bang, you can still see it. And that's kind of what drove me to look at ethics. So I just wanted here's just a kind of an overview. On the left, what we're doing, the ethics that we are in general catering to, and on the right, what we should be doing. And I just want to draw attention to number one. Does this work? Yeah. For the environmental ethics, what we really need to have, I think, is rights of nature, yes, but I think rights of nature is part of it, but a declaration of dependence. And I think people are shaky about this. I don't think that there's really clear uniformity of views that we depend on nature. I think that we really view, or at least I don't know what we really view, but there's this sense that the future is technology. Technology eventually can overcome the constraints of nature, and that we don't really need nature. It's nice to have nature, but it's not really necessary. And I think we either need to address that or kind of work around it. And I suggest maybe we work around it by saying, whether it's necessary to have nature or not, it's certainly desirable. And for all these reasons, environmental education, it's just nice to have nature around. And whereas I believe it's absolutely necessary, but maybe we can't ever convince that. Maybe that's kind of going into religious concepts that aren't really worth going into. But I really feel that there's just a lot of dangerous confusion around, are we dependent on nature or not? We talk about balancing human needs and nature's needs. To me, it's not balancing is the wrong answer. We don't want to balance. We want to put nature first. And ultimately, we benefit from doing that. So it's not really a matter of people don't count. It's that people count, but future people count as much as present people. So I think there's a lot to do, and I'd be interested in knowing more about the bioethics field, which I think is way advanced in terms of hashing out these issues, whereas in water it's still quite fresh. So basically, you don't have to buy my book, because all I say in the book is that there are 4 kinds of water ethics, and I just distinguish those, which I've already alluded to, is that there are environmental ethics related to water, there are social ethics, there are cultural ethics, and there are economic ethics. Good economic analysis would get us maybe 90% of where we need to go, but it's that other 10% is still critical. So I just want to run through these quickly, like what do I mean by environmental ethics? And these are not just, they are my concepts, but these are also going to be the building blocks for the Water Ethics Charter that we're working on, that will be a short statement of principles. We've set 2 pages as our page limit, and we're going to write this over the next month, because we had a meeting on the Water Ethics Charter 3 weeks ago, and it was very awkward because we don't have a charter, so what are we talking about? So we decided, okay, we need to just slap something together, and it will be changed, but we'll present that to the world as saying, this is the kind of thing that we're trying to do, please help us make it better. But, so these are some of the issues. Rights to nature in some way is going to go in there, and that also the concept of respect, I think, is important, that we want to respect nature. We're not cordoning off nature. The American Indians don't not eat the deer because the deer is sacred. They eat the deer, but they eat it respectfully, and they kill it respectfully, and that it's that kind of approach that I think we need to bring to water. And it's that kind of approach that you can see in many engineers and hydrologists have that. I spoke with a hydrologist once that we had both listened to a talk on water ethics. I'll tell you who it was by Cynthia Barnett, who wrote a very good book called Blue Revolution 2 years ago. And she gave a talk at a water meeting, a keynote address about water ethics, and I was debriefing with the hydrologist afterwards, and I said, wasn't that a great talk? And he said, she was talking down to us. She was talking as if we, the technical scientists, aren't ethical, that we don't have ethics. And he said, that's why I went into hydrology, because I'm concerned about the environment. So, and that was a revelation to me, that I had thought of ethics as kind of a social science thing, or a philosophical domain, but it's not. And but that respect needs to be encouraged and inculcated in the training and in our expectations for water. So these issues of ethics are not just what the engineer should be doing or the water manager should be doing. It's what we as the public should be expecting and holding everybody accountable for. And everybody means the elected officials. Water is so, the reason it's so thorny to work on the ethics is that it goes everywhere. So you can't really say who is a water manager, because every public official has something to do with overseeing something or other having to do with water. It can be wastewater, it can be streets and drainage, it can be sanitation, it can be water supply, it can be parks and recreation. We're all kind of to blame, I guess, for the crisis that we've created. The other kind of ethic, this last one, is there is a really interesting transition that's already happened in the field of flood control. It's not even called flood control. The Army Corps is even supposed to call it flood management, like flood risk management, managing the risk of floods. So the idea of command and control has already been tossed out, and it's supposed to be management. But in fact, it hasn't been tossed out, because we're still, the command and control is still with us, but at least the official kind of policies are shifting. These structures, which are a little higher than this room, it's like a jack, like a metal jack, were tossed along the Rio Grande over the 1970s, late 60s to late 70s. More than 300,000 of these things were installed along the banks of the Rio Grande just to tame the river and to tame and train the river, because the river was meandering too much. So that, now they're taking them out, or they're slowly trying to take them out. And that's another example of our values have changed, and which is a good thing. But now we have to learn from that about the principles of maybe checking in with our values before we build 300,000 of these things. Okay, and then social water, I'm not going to go through all of this, but the idea of water as the universal right to water access, that's a social issue, which is really important. So in a way, from the perspective of establishing a charter of water ethics, we can kind of say social ethics, no problem. We already have standards for that. But we need to kind of repeat them, just like it's like the liturgy or something. You keep repeating the same words, because it needs to be operationalized. And another aspect of, well, number 2 here is the human right to enjoy healthy water ecosystems. This is a great kind of where I think water ethics and bioethics get really close together here. The human right to a healthy environment, which is winding its way through the UN process, will probably become a human right at some point. It's already in a lot of national laws. But I think it's a very, to me, a quite potentially significant step forward to say everybody has a right to a river that's healthy, and to frogs in the river and to things like that. So that's an area where not only does water ethics get close to bioethics, but social ethics overlaps with environmental ethics. And then governance systems and what kind of governance you have is also critical, because if you don't have a democratic or kind of some kind of engagement process for a broad cross-section of civil society, if your water is being managed by oligarchs or by a small group, you're in trouble. I mean, you might start off with good ethics, but you're not going to end up that way. And this is some non-human primates sharing water in India. And on the cultural side, I think this is important, not in addition to protecting cultures as almost a social good, but culture happens at a collective level. So it's not a matter of, you can't give cultural rights to an individual. It has to be to a group, and to a group who actually have a culture. But it's also important for us, for the non-Indigenous people, and for all the people outside of that particular culture, to learn to respect a different way of viewing water, and the traditions that go along with that. The deities that sprinkle the rice fields of Bali because the goddess is watching over the rice fields. You know, we want to respect that tradition, that belief system. We don't have to believe it, and sometimes I don't know if the Balinese believe it either, but they support it, and it's very much part of their lives. Bali is a great place to go if you ever have doubt that culture makes a difference, because you see it all day long. There are so many little rituals that Balinese do throughout the day, and it's something that maybe we all used to do that, but we don't do it anymore. And then to look for ways, the last one, to look creatively for how the way that water is handled and managed, and the way that the governance system is designed, actually supports the cultural sovereignty of the group that's living there. That's just not directly water, but a coal mine in a tribal area of Chhattisgarh, which did not have the permission of the local people, but who cares? Because according to the Indian government, we don't have indigenous people in India. We're all indigenous. So the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People is a nice word, but it doesn't mean anything. But then the economics of water ethics, just the idea of not wasting things. Don't waste our cultural values. Don't waste our ecosystem functions. And I adopt water-saving technologies because saving water, in Santa Fe, all the hotels have a little sign that says, saving water is always in season. But saving water is, you can, I don't know what that is. I guess it's environmental value, it's also an economic value, but it's not enough. We have to do more than save water. So what I'd like to think about is ecological and economic. So I'm just calling it ECO2, just so you remember that. So look for win-wins between the economics and the environment, and there are lots of them. And when you do that, you get to have more fun because you're looking for solutions. And the dam issue is it's still a huge issue. We settled it. 2000, there was a big report that said, dams can be okay, but only if everybody agrees to it. And then nothing happened because the economy, it was too expensive to make dams, and now the World Bank is back in the dam business. So it's become an issue again. And I think we have to kind of re-examine, revisit the dams issue and remember what we decided 10 years ago, that maybe it's still relevant. And then just to tie it in with the agricultural group here at the Bioethics Institute, the approach that I see for linking values into agriculture, linking ethics into agriculture, is multifunctionality. The idea that agriculture is not just a production function. It's not only for food and fiber that we grow food. I mean, that is, but it's not the only reason, and that there are other services it provides, from cultural heritage to employment to rural, the livelihoods of rural communities, not only of the rural individuals, the way of life, environmental values of certain kinds of agriculture. I mean, you could say that every agricultural system has some kind of environment, creates an environment of some sort. So let's try to make it create a more interesting environment. So the issues of agriculture to me are water issues, because 3/4 of the world's water is used for growing food, or used for agriculture, not necessarily growing food. I mean, cotton is included. So that you can't really disentangle water from agriculture, which is another reason I'm here, because I'm here because it seems that the agricultural group is interested in the same question. So that line between agriculture and water is a very slippery one, as it should be. And there's a lot of support within the established agricultural community for looking at the different functions of agriculture. There's not clear support for small and beautiful agroecological approaches as opposed to industrial approaches, but that's a very live issue that we were arguing about last night, and we'll continue to argue about for years and years. But along with arguing that kind of little versus big, there's so much richness that needs to go into those arguments about, okay, what if you have large-scale agroecological agriculture? What would that look like? Even industrial agroecological, is that an oxymoron, or can you have that? But this particular report that had inputs from all the major players like World Bank and Food and Agriculture Organization has a surprisingly environmental tone to it, so I would recommend it. And this is just a depiction of a water user organization, a governance system in Bali, where they're famous for their subaks. And the subaks, which is both the physical irrigation system and the management system, also have buildings. And the buildings in the back over there are temples, because you can't have a meeting area for your subak without having a temple to go with it. So, what can we do? Much of what we can, there's so much that's already been done. So what we're trying to do with the Water Ethics Charter, which I'm going to talk about next, and then that's the end, just so you know. What we're trying to do with the Water Ethics Charter is build on all these declarations. We're trying not to say anything new. We want to say something that has a history that we can refer. This was agreed in the 1992 Dublin Conference. It was a prep meeting for Rio +0, you know, 1990, the original Rio. And the EU Water Framework Directive is, the European Water Framework Directive is a great piece of legislation that we can learn a lot from. Anyway, what we're trying to do with the Ethics Charter is make a statement of principles, get endorsements by cities and corporations. Those are our two target audiences. We don't really have a great strategy for how we're going to do this, but that's the intention. And it will be, we're using the next World Water Forum. Every 3 years there's a World Water Forum. The next one is April it's not on World Water Day for some reason. It's in April in Korea. And that will be our kind of presentation of the Water Ethics Charter. And it will launch a 2-year process of looking for endorsements from cities and corporations and anybody else. But I want to end on the idea of what we can do for a global water ethic and what we can do to use ethics for practical purposes. I think we have to be creative. And just a couple examples of that. It can be old creative, like this is Bali. And I mean, I don't know what these guys are being paid, but it's a pretty nice working environment. In Sweden, there are a lot of textile companies that used to produce cloth in Sweden. Now most of their manufacturing is actually done in India and Turkey. And because of that, they banded together to create a socially responsible Swedish water textile initiative where they do training and actually provide funds for water treatment in India and Turkey to kind of try to help those textile companies honor the same types of standards that they would have to do in Sweden. It's not a one-for-one exactly, but it's using ethics along and rather than regulations, because there are no regulations. And cooperation is another way to be creative, and the Rhine River Commission is a great example of cooperation resulting in practical benefits like salmon that you can actually eat. And another old, new thing to do is just make water visible. This is Freiburg, Germany, where they have these Beckley, the little canals on every street in that town, which is an historic thing and is part of the tourist attraction. But everybody in that city knows where their water comes from. And that's it. Thank you very much for your attention. Look forward to a few comments.
Thank you, David. It was terrific. We have till 1:15, so.
So I'm going to moderate. So, yes.
So to kind of get back to your statement from Santa Fe, the council member that said, there's just not enough water for both us and the river. What are your thoughts on, urbanization is increasing in every country on Earth, basically, and the concentration of people in every place is increasing, and that's going to lead to situations where regionally there's not enough water available for the population, right? Because we're not near enough. So what is the thought on how to kind of ethically address that? And is the solution, well, we just shouldn't make cities so big that the water sources within the region can't accommodate them? Or is there some other kind of sustainable solution? And in Israel, for instance, where I had studied for a little bit, now they're pumping water back up from the Mediterranean that they desalinate into the Sea of Galilee because they've depleted it so severely. What are the sorts of solutions for areas where there just really are too many people for the water sources? Do they need to move elsewhere?
Well, I think a good model is agriculture. I mean, almost the definition of urbanism, or at least a feature of urbanism, is a settlement that can no longer feed itself, that it needs to bring food in from outside. I mean, I'm thinking, go back to Ur, back to Sumer. So I think that's just the nature of urbanism, and urbanism is great. We wouldn't be here without urbanism. So yeah, bring water in from outside. That's fine. I mean, in my opinion, nothing ethically even questionable about that. It's just, but when you have an urban environment, it doesn't mean you can't have water in there both in an ecologically significant way and in a socially meaningful way. Like you have here in Baltimore. Baltimore's Inner Harbor is famous for waterfront development. And that's, it's not exactly, it's great brackish water, but it's okay, it's almost fresh water. So I think that there's so much exciting stuff that you can do with cities and bringing water, taking the approach of how can we celebrate the water? How can we, because it's so valuable, let's use it and reuse it and find ways of recycling it. I didn't talk about recycling, but to me, water is always recycled, but we need to kind of speed up that recycling so it can do more stuff. So it can, in my river in Santa Fe, it can flow down the river, it can infiltrate into the ground, we can pump it out again, we can use it in our houses, we could in theory have decentralized wastewater treatment, put it back into the ground, it would flow back into the river, it would recharge the river, and so just ways of thinking cradle to grave stuff. And it's really exciting to talk to designers about these things, because they have lots of ideas. And then on the pumping salt water, desal into the Sea of Galilee, there's something wrong with that picture, because it's very expensive. Why is the Sea of Galilee diminishing? So I think you'd have to pick out so many pieces to that puzzle. When I lived in DC, I used to shop at the Tacoma Food Co-op, and I bought carrots from Israel. Israeli carrots. That's Jordan River water, probably, maybe, or at least it could be replaced. So why were we allowed to buy, Jordan River carrots? We shouldn't be. So that's an ethics of agriculture and an ethics of water. So that's just such a knotty issue, but it's a great one. It's a great. But just on the Jordan, there's some really interesting cooperation work being done by Friends of the Earth Middle East. I don't know if you're aware of it, but they're trying to appeal to the religious traditions. They have all these documents prepared by kind of the concepts of water, not water ethics, but water responsibility to nature from an Islamic, Jewish, and Christian perspective. So they're really trying to play the religious card in a healthy way around those issues. Okay, sorry, I better stop there. But that's a great question, great comment. Thank you. Yes?
It seems like there's a difficult situation with the making water a human right, and then also trying to tackle the economics. I know I find that because water is so subsidized, I don't see any correlation between my water usage and what I pay for it. And I find there's this disconnect between like rinsing out my peanut butter jar so I can recycle it,
Right.
and using massive amounts of water to do that, because there's a clear incentive and a clear system in place that says recycling is good, this is how you do it.
Yeah.
And I know that I should be conserving water, but there's absolutely no incentive in place for me to do that. And it's very hard to even think, conceptualizing these things to make it a priority.
I think peanut butter jars are the worst. It sticks. But there was a controversy. The CEO of Nestle made a statement a few years ago that just only in the last few months it recirculated on the web. It was not exactly viral YouTube video, but he was objecting. Basically, the French water companies were pretty happy to have water as a human right because it would be good for business. But the Nestle guy, whose name I don't remember, he made a statement which is maybe a little bit taken out of context, but basically saying that, okay, the water as a human right just has to be a little piece, and you can't have too much water as a human right because then it gets too expensive. So he wanted to acknowledge that yes, it's true, you need water to survive, so it has to be a human right, but you don't want too much water without paying for it because we want to sell our products. So I think that you can separate out the water service and the water itself, and that a certain amount of water, it does have to be a human right, just like there's a human right to food because you need that. And then, yes, then you have to create, it's a policy issue, a governance issue to create incentives to make that all work. So I don't really have a ready-made answer for the peanut. I would say don't recycle the peanut jar, just throw that one away. But when in a third world context where people don't have access to clean water, or where they used to have clean water and now it's gotten contaminated from the gold mine upriver, or from the cows that are now encroaching because the place where the cows used to graze is now a palm oil plantation. There are all kinds of chain reactions. Then it has a more obvious meaning to see water as a human right. But thanks for your unanswerable question.
So I want to throw out, if there's not a question, one.
Okay.
There was one, no, take it, please.
Okay.
Do you fight corporations who abuse water and have the ability to hire lawyers? And who's going to fight them? And where's
The
money?
Army Corps of Engineers talks about flood fighting, and now they're talking about flood management. I think we need to manage corporations and not fight them, because I think if we try to fight corporations, we're going to lose. I think we need to. This is my feeling. What we're trying to do with the Water Ethics Charter is enlist corporations into the ethics discussion. I don't know how it's going to work. I sat on the plane yesterday next to a guy who works for Syngenta. Syngenta is the manufacturer of atrazine. So we were talking about atrazine, and he's saying atrazine is the best thing for the environment because it limits soil erosion because you don't have to plow. And I'm saying it's the worst thing for the environment because it's a persistent contaminant, and that's why they don't allow it in Europe. So, but if we try to fight Syngenta, I don't know. So yes, I think there's a need for Greenpeace. I'm a member of Greenpeace, but I think that there's so much we can do. I think I can see a pathway to influencing the water agenda through trying to create alliances with corporations who are also doing things that I consider really bad. Like Coca-Cola is doing terrible things in India, it seems. They're also doing some great things on water, with their water policy, and they have a goal of zero net water use by 2020. So net neutral by 2020 in water. And then they have a way of calculating. So again, I'm not answering, but I'm commenting. Why don't you ask me?
I think we should probably stop just out of respect for people needing to go.
I think you should have the last word.
No, we'll catch it. It won't be a short last word. So we want to thank David very much.